It's a parent's worst nightmare, their child abducted or harmed by a stranger. But frequently, the person most likely to harm or kidnap the kid may be the parents themselves during a child custody case, according to my guest today. She's Catherine MacWillie. She's been a Southern California police officer for 23 years. She's been on the front line and seen it all. Now she's forming a company to help reduce the violence. Great to have you here today, Catherine.
Thank you.
You know, you hear so much today about child molesters and pedophiles that you think the main thing for a parent would be to, you know, keep the bad guy away from their kids. So when you hear that the parents are actually part of the problem in a lot of these cases, it just seems unnatural to me.
Well, it's very, you know, I say divorce is really traumatic, dramatic, and devastating to this country now. It's really approaching epidemic proportions for police departments and schools.
Now, over the 23 years, you've done a lot of research on this and things that you've seen. You estimate that 25% of all violent crime or serious crime is related to family law in some way?
Yes, and I don't even differentiate now between violent crime. It's crime. 25% in this country is related to family law. We have homicides, suicides, abductions, kidnaps, but we also have lesser crimes, violation of court orders, annoying phone calls, burglaries, cars being stolen, one parent taking the car in an effort to gain leverage or complicate the other person's life, children being withheld, and the police department is frequently called in to handle these disputes. Or what's happening now is a lot of people are filing false police reports and false child abuse allegations. And so for our social services—
So to get back at the other parent, you file a false accusation that—
Right. In order to gain an advantage in family law court now, people are drawing in the different resources, social services, school teachers, classrooms. School districts are having to set up whole departments just to settle issues such as child being enrolled in school in violation of a court order, unenrolled for court order, police officers on campuses to deal with it, principals dealing with it. It's really, you know, and I don't think I'm overstating this at all, it's really destroying the infrastructure of this country.
And you're really drawn into it as a police officer. I mean, it's one thing, you know, you can talk about the statistics, but you're there when somebody calls 911 or something, you're the person who goes out there and has to deal with whatever's going on. And so I want to ask you about some of your experiences you've had, because since you and I discussed this interview at first, unfortunately we share some emails, and I'd say we'd send each other articles, and there was one with a father that you told me about, or I'd also heard about, didn't realize was custody related, but father set the SUV on with his
fire.
2 children in the SUV, set it on fire, and I guess killed the kids, right?
Yeah, the children died in the fire.
I sent you the one on the father who was shot by the police while he was kidnapping his daughter during a custody dispute. We just had the custody judge who was shot. I didn't read all the details of that, I guess, you know, but that was a similar type of thing.
You know, it's interesting to point out in that particular case, first the father stabbed the mother and killed her, and then went after and shot the judge through the windows of the courthouse, which is a little bit more, you know, aggressive than, you know, someone coming into a courthouse and making a complaint. This person actually set up with a rifle 2 football fields away and fired through the window.
Wow, wow. You also, beforehand, we were talking about the case of the father who threw his daughter off the cliff, or allegedly, and is now on trial for that. And then I also emailed you on vacation about the doctor in South Beach who threw his 2 kids over the balcony apparently, and then jumped himself, and the wife heard the screams and ran in the room and saw them down below. But those are just some recent things. So obviously, people are doing some pretty awful things to their own kids. And again, it's not just these strangers, it's the parents who you think would be looking out to. So, but what do you see? Again, that's from the news, that's the headlines. What do you see when you go out there, though?
I think it's really important to point out, first of all, that even though some of the cases we've cited here in the discussions are fathers, we have mothers who have also been involved in doing terrible scenarios and who've killed or stabbed their children. This is not an exclusive men's situation or exclusively a women's situation. You know, my company, Custody Calculations, we're really geared about correcting the problems that are in the family law court system. And I don't care if it's a mother who's behaving badly or a father who's behaving badly.
You've been pretty even-handed about that it's men and women on both sides.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of people who would say, well, you're definitely for father's rights or you're definitely for mother's rights. No, I'm about protecting the child, because as a police officer, when one parent doesn't show up at school to pick up the child. It doesn't matter if it's mom who doesn't show up. It doesn't matter if it's dad who doesn't show up. It's the child that I'm holding in my arms who's crying, saying, Mommy said Daddy's supposed to pick me up. Daddy says Mommy's supposed to pick me up. And the teacher's sitting there. It's 5 or 6 o'clock now. Department of Children's Services is rolling out. And these children become afraid of saying to one parent or the other, Mommy, when do I see Daddy again? Daddy, when do I get to see Mommy again? They're actually afraid because parents don't realize that even though their children are young, they pick up on a lot of the frustration.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Yes.
and so we've really created a very high level of anxiety for children. And some children cope by running away from home, getting involved in drugs, getting involved in gangs, getting pregnant as they become older. So even though, you know, a parent may say, well, we haven't had problems for years, the child continues to act out and create these problems. Or, you know, as an officer, I'll respond to a whole entirely different set of scenarios where the parents, frustrated from a day of court, come home, start yelling and screaming at the child and overreact or punish the child inappropriately. Or
Meaning?
they hit the child in a manner, leaving bruises. Or mom or dad comes home from court and the judge has ruled that their whole life is going to change. They're going to lose their home, they're going to lose their job, and they commit suicide. Or they go after the other parent. They go and kill the
And a
other
lot of times
parent.
the kids are used as pawns. I mean, when they're kidnapped or something, it's not necessarily, I'm assuming, because they want the child or looking out for the child. It may be to get back at the other parent.
Right, they
Or-
don't see it that way, but that's, you know, if the most important person to the other person is the child, or if they feel that they can hurt the person through the child, they're just so mad at them. They don't oftentimes see or recognize what their actions are. They just say, your mom or your dad is a terrible human being, and they don't really care about you, and they just create a terrible scenario for their children.
Because I've noticed sometimes now when I hear Amber Alerts, they'll say, you know, the parent, or they think it's one of the father or something, or mother who kidnapped the kid. And I think beforehand you had mentioned the statistics from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, that something like, what is it, 800,000 kids are kidnapped?
I just went on the website last night and they were saying that there's just under 800,000 children that are kidnapped yearly in this country.
A quarter of those are by
And
the
about
parents?
25, the statistics vary somewhat, but anywhere from 25 to 30% of those are identified specifically as being by the parent.
Now, and how serious are most of those, do you think? I mean, on the one hand, we were talking about some of the murders, basically, when the parents actually just kill the kids. How severe is most of it? I mean, are they, you know, do they usually harm the kid when they kidnap them, or is it, do they just take the kid?
You know, I know that's a question people frequently want to ask. Well, you know, what is the percentage of children that are murdered? What are the percentages of children who are abused? And let me ask you, if you were a parent, would you really care about that? And I think the answer is no. All that you know is that for 24 hours, for 48 hours, for 6 months, for a year, you don't know where your child is. Or they come home and they're covered in bruises. Or, you know, or we have this case right now in Los Angeles.
So the traumatic experience.
It's traumatic, and I really want us to get away from saying, what is the percentage, or what is this? If it's your child, all you know is that you want them back, you want them safe, you wish you could solve the problem. And really, as a police agency, as a social service agency, as a school teacher who's had this child in the classroom, as a grandparent, as a extended family member, all you want is for that child to grow up happy and safe. And we're an amazing...
It's good to hear somebody is interested in that for the kid.
You know, we're an amazing country. We have nothing but opportunities here, and yet we have failed to solve one of the most basic issues in this country, which is, as we grapple with illegal immigration and drugs and gangs, a family unit is one of the most important aspects of this country, and we have failed to, you know, provide solutions.
Have you directly rescued any kidnapped kids? Have you been called and, you know, and taken the kid away, or, or got the kid back, however you want to phrase it?
You know, certainly I've been involved in a significant number of cases involving going to a house and a parent saying, my child, you know, I can't get custody because the mother's withholding it or the father's withholding it. In fact, for our police department, And I think it's important to point out, I'm still a police officer. I'm still responding to radio calls, and I will be retiring here in the short future to work on this issue full time. But it's almost 100% of our radio calls, Mother's Day.
Oh, really?
Almost 100% of our radio calls. And we're a large police department in a large city.
Wow.
But during day watch, which, you know, will start, our hours will vary. But when I say day watch, I'm talking about anywhere from 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, even up to 8 o'clock at night. A good percentage, you know, especially at those morning hours, it's almost 100% of our radio calls.
Wow.
And not only is it 100% of our radio calls and, you know, during peak hours during the day, our police stations have become havens where people exchange custody of our children, one parent to the other, people who would argue or fight or might scream or yell or tug of war over their children. Police departments all over this country are finding themselves as the exchange location. Mm-hmm. So Mother's Day, Father's Day, Friday nights, Saturday mornings, Sunday evenings, you know, we are finding our lobbies full of children being exchanged from one parent to the other. So it's not just radio calls, it's right there in the station, or people coming to the police department because the child's not there at the other location. Now they're making a police report.
In just a second. We'll be right back with Catherine MacWillie right after this. We are back with Catherine MacWillie today, a police officer, talking about child custody disputes and parents who kidnap their children. How old are most of these kids? What age range are we talking? I'm assuming they're not, you know, 18 generally. It's younger kids. You know.
Yeah, I was noticing some profiling work that's been done lately where it's identifying what the typical ages are of parents who abduct their children, and you know, who's employed, who's unemployed, dual citizenship. You know, here's the other thing too, is that you don't just have local abductions and kidnaps, you have international. You know, in fact, the United States is one of a group of countries around the world that has an agreement, the Hague Convention, in which they'll return children to their country of origin. I mean, we're talking about, this is such an impacting issue that there's a treaty that exists among countries of the world.
Sure. And well, I think you mentioned that you had interest from Australia in the company that you've set up because they've had the same kind of issue down there where, you know, as we do in the U.S. with parents kidnapping.
I participate in a lot of blogging groups, a lot of mail groups, a lot of different organizations that are communicating their frustration at the different venues or the different avenues by which family law functions and what they can do to correct a problem. And one particular person who joined one of the groups that I participate in is from Australia. And he was saying how, you know, Australia in many respects reflects what's happening here in the U.S., but maybe at a different magnification. And they were asking what the availability would be of taking the company and having it function there in Australia to deal with many of the issues that they're currently dealing with.
Are most of these kidnappings long-term things? I mean, I've heard about cases where the kid was kidnapped when they were little, and then, you know, maybe when they're 16, they're finally reunited. I mean, in some cases, I guess the way they get away with it, I don't claim to, or I haven't researched it as much as you have, but I think, though, that maybe they tell them the other parent is dead in some cases, or, because you wonder, you know, if the little kid was kidnapped when he grew up, you know, wouldn't he wonder what happened to the other parent, or he or she, and, but I guess they just lie to them? Is that the way that you...
Well, they do, and sometimes the children are taken at such a young age that they never come to understand anything other than what their parent tells them. Or what happens a lot of times is you have kids that are actually kidnapped, what I call in plain sight. That is really becoming a new term that I'm starting to develop, where they're kidnapped in plain sight, where one parent will withhold custody, the other parent will go to family law court and attempt to enforce the court order, have violation of court orders or sanctions applied. And it's such a difficult process that sometimes to get your children back, if you do it through the court system, if you do it legally, one parent can be more aggressive than the other. It can take 6 months, a year, and by then...
Meaning they could be in the same town and you know, like the kid's in the, well, let's say the mother's house in this case. She's got the kid, the father knows that he or she's there, and he can't get him back because...
Well, now the children are saying they don't want to come home. It's called parent alienation syndrome, and it's It's a topic that's been around for a long time, but it's gaining momentum as fathers become more aggressive in court to taking custody. Now you have what I call that kidnapped in plain sight, where a parent will actually alienate the child, brainwash the child. So even though they've never even left their town, they're still at their same school, the police departments are reluctant to take any aggressive action to put a child in a police vehicle or to transport the child or to allow or say to the parent, okay, you know, Mark or Cindy or Jose or Juanita, you need to go into the car now to go with your dad or go with your mom. Now the children have actually been brainwashed. So
that they don't want to leave.
So that they don't want to leave, or they believe their
parent.
parent.
You know, what the kids are thinking. Do they just think that, you know, does the parents say, oh, we're going on a trip and they don't know what happened? Or as you said, they've actually been brainwashed to the point where they don't want to leave, even though the other parent may have the custody. And then, but so what happens if the parent calls the police, though? What do you do when you go out there?
Well, you know, most of the time it depends on what an officer's experience and how, you know, effective they are. Sometimes we'll call a parent over the phone and we'll get them to cooperate by bringing the child down to the police station. Sometimes we'll call a parent up over the phone, nobody's there, the officers will go to the house, there's nobody there. We might go to a grandparent's house or another relative's house, there's nobody there. You know, the district attorney has even set up special offices now to deal with abductions and kidnaps. Most of the people are unaware of those different avenues available to them, but the district attorney has special training that they have for special district attorney prosecution on certain cases when they've been taken without somebody's consent or knowledge.
Was there a tendency for people to take it less seriously because it was a parent? I mean, whereas if it was a stranger, you would think, you know, you'd knock down the door and go get them, but if it's the parent, you think, oh, well, it's the mother, you know.
Yeah, you know, typically because they say, well, they're probably not endangered. It's just mom or it's dad that has the child. I'm sure they'll come back. And so
although we know the parents do kill the kids.
Right. There have been some very serious scenarios. We even have serious scenarios in which children have killed a parent.
Absolutely.
We have a very famous case down in Texas right now where a boy, convinced that his father had molested him, actually took a gun from his mother's home and shot his father in the back. And they've started an organization called Help Stop Parent Alienation Syndrome. But
so you're saying that the mother brainwashed the kid into believing
well,
that?
I'm not going to make a determination at this point. I just know.
Or some people believe that.
Right. It's been alleged that the mother brainwashed the child into believing that they had been physically or sexually abused, and the child reacting to that process actually shot and killed his own parent. So you have the gamut of everything from a child being convinced that he needs to protect himself and firing and killing a parent to a parent killing a child. I mean, it's humanity at its worst and acting upon its own self in a family unit. I mean, not even counting what strangers will do to a family. Now we've got family members.
Yeah, in both ways. It's really awful. Now, one thing you mentioned is that I think, and your company is trying to address, is that one thing that contributes to this is some of the court orders themselves, I think, apparently, right? There's a vagueness, or you may call the police and they look at it and they don't know what in the hell it means, or it's hard to read or understand. Or you want to tell me a bit more about that?
You know, it's everyone out there has a different phrase, a manner in which they give a court order. Or if you just look at the fact that you have 1.4 million people a year filing for divorce, entering the system, and some people stay in the system for 10 years, 12 years. And I mean, some judges actually see children grow up in front of them. They see the parents year after year. So you have 1.4 million people going into a system. You have a court backlog that can be 2, 3, 4, 5 months long. And so what you have is a judge who has very little time to give a court order until they're on to their next case. And so the judge will give a court order for that problem at that moment. That's very short-sighted. Now, and I want to make it real clear, I think we have an unrealistic expectation of what we expect our judicial officers to do, especially when they give them so little time to effectively deal with this issue. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping to do with what I've designed in my company. But
can you give an example, let's say, of a vague court order, or why it's a problem for you as a police officer when you go out there, what it says and why you don't know how to handle the situation?
Sometimes there'll be 5 or 6 or 7 different court orders. They went to court on a custody order. Then they changed the custody and visitation. They only took out or said, we're only going to change this paragraph. Then they go to court. There's a new problem. Mother or father is supposed to be able to contact the child by phone, and they're never there for their 5 o'clock telephone call. So they go back to court and say, Your Honor, I'm supposed to be able to contact my child at 5 o'clock. But when I call, no one's ever home, the phone's been disconnected, I get an answering machine or the answering machine. Well, the judge makes a new ruling. So, or they'll say this replaces the prior ruling. So you can have 10 and 12 court orders valid at any one time.
So you have to be an attorney to...
It can take hours to sort out this paragraph's valid on this court order, this paragraph's valid on this court order. And then you have the attorneys that will phrase something, and they don't always get it right either because of the number of clients they have. And sometimes mistakes and errors are made in the minute orders. And so you have to go back and request a copy of the transcripts. And so when you put in the attorney's
That must take some time, right? I mean, it's
yes.
Somebody calls 911 and says, I need my kid back, and meanwhile you have to go to the courthouse and do research and look up. And...
Exactly. Or they'll write something handwritten until a final court order comes out that's stamped and approved, and you can't even read the writing sometimes. So even if an officer wants to enforce the court order, you go, I can't read this. If I can't read it, I can't enforce it. Or the judge said this on this court order, but now this court order says this, but they seem to be in direct opposites. Or the worst part about it is what I call an anomaly. That's a new term that'll be used in family law.
We'll pick up on that right after this. We'll be right back with Catherine MacWillie. And we are back with Catherine MacWillie today, a police officer talking about parents who kidnap their children as part of child custody cases. Well, you had started to tell us about anomalies before break. You want to tell us what that is?
Well, that's a new term that'll start being used in courts. And what that means is when the courts actually rule to place children in the custody of both parents at the same time. And they're not
now,
even
is that
aware.
Intentionally or accidentally?
No, they're doing it accidentally. They're not even aware that they're doing it because an anomaly may only happen every other year, or it may only happen once every couple of years or 3 years.
And is it because something like they say there's some vague language like every other this or something that instead of a specific date? Is that
exactly? Well, it happens 2 reasons. One is, let's say Mother's Day. Well, every Mother's Day goes to custody of the children goes to Mother's Day. Every Father's Day, custody goes to Father's Day. Well, if you have a child that's born on Mother's Day or Father's Day, well, now the courts will say, okay, Dad, you get custody every other year on the child's birthday, even years. Mom, you get custody in odd years. Well, that means when Dad goes to get his custody on Mother's Day, well, Mom has custody. And so the police department will be called out, and we'll look at the court going, okay, Dad, yes, it's every other year, and this is your year to have custody. Well, Mom, you get custody every Mother's Day. So you both have legal custody today.
So what do you do?
Custody then goes to whoever can keep it or take it, which is inappropriate. And it's very difficult for officers. In fact, there's a whole other issue that comes on board with that, and that is complaints being made against officers. That's a whole other discussion. And then that'll happen with holidays, Christmas, Christmas Eve, other holidays, or like, for instance, let's say mothers have a birthday on the same year as their child. Well, and then if they say Christmas is ruled every other year for one parent, and now, the other custody goes to they'll be in conflict with each other. So.
Now, we're running out of time, but you have a solution for this, or that's one thing that with your business you're hoping to address, is that you want to start a service so that people can have clearer court orders. Is that what it comes down to?
Right. What I did is I've been researching this issue for 10 years, and I said, if we know these are all the problems that occur, why don't we, with the technology that we have, the capabilities that we have, just say, if this is what we know happens at the end, why don't we just correct it at the beginning? We can do that a couple different ways. First of all, if we cannot, we spend so much time having people come back to court to solve the problem when it occurs, why don't we just give them everything they need at the onset, a template of court orders, a standardized court orders with simple language.
How would you deal with that anomaly with the parents?
Well, that's done with a software development company. We've preloaded a 50-year calendar into the future. And what the program will do is it'll identify the segment of when the child is with each parent. And then what'll happen is you'll enter information into screens. And then if the courts give a ruling, or when they go into court and you know that these things exist, the software will actually identify for the courts within moments what the custody or if any anomalies exist. And then it also print out color-coded calendars for the parents, pink for mother's custody, blue for father's custody, and there's a children's calendar in there.
And you're working with the courts on this?
Well, I've interviewed a lot of court personnel, interviewed a lot of attorneys, mediators, counseling agencies. We went out and pre-interviewed them. We went back with the services. We re-interviewed them, showed them what the services are. So we've had a tremendous input in development of these
Well, I wish you well with it. It's a
services.
very noble undertaking, a very worthy cause, and I
Thank
wish you
you.
well with it, and I hope it helps straighten out some of the mess out there.
Yes.
This is Catherine MacWillie, a police officer, telling us about child custody cases today. Thank you very much for being here
Thank
today,
you
Catherine.
for the opportunity.
Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.